Arkansas beats Cincinnati by a final score of 31-24 to start the season 1-0 on the season. And we're going to talk about three of the biggest takeaways that I had from Arkansas's victory over the Bearcats over the weekend here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Nabors. I am also the host of Out of Bounds. You can catch every weekday afternoon from 1 to 4 on 103.7 The Buzz and 103.7thebuzz.com. Hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. I know I sure did, because you're talking about Arkansas getting the victory over Cincinnati, which was a really, really solid victory and a win that we will take all day long, because anytime that you can win a game, it's always big. But to beat a top 25 team like Cincinnati coming into this game is huge. Now, was it the blowout fashion that I predicted? Of course not. That just wasn't going to happen. But it was still fun. It was a still fun game, and there were some good things to take away and some not so great things to take away. So I'm going to give my three. And honestly, it's like I have one really good one like needs improvement one, and then one that's kind of just a general deal, because I think that there's kind of umbrella things that are under there too, and there's a lot more I could take away. These are just the three things that I thought of the first thing from this game. And I'll start with I don't know, should I start with the negative or the positive? I don't know. Okay, how about this? I'll start with the positive. Let's go on a good note here. The first big positive I had was Trey Knox. Now, Trey Knox, as we know, is a guy that's been at the University of Arkansas for quite some time. He's had quite the journey. Going into his fourth season, he came here under Chad Morris his freshman year. He had a pretty good amount of production, or at least comparatively to the other wide receivers. He scored more touchdowns than any other wide receiver, and he had a really great freshman year. His sophomore year was a non-factor. Didn't even really play. Didn't even know where he was half the time, because Traylon Burks really shined out. And then last year, he had kind of a transitional thing where they were like, all right, well, we can't get him on the field at wide receiver. It's just not happening. But maybe we can put him in kind of this hybrid tight end position, even though he's not built like a stereotypical tight end. And let's just kind of see how he can do with that. And he showed some signs of some real good potential there. Obviously, the blocking and being a little bit smaller wasn't exactly helpful to him. But after an offseason and coming back this year and sticking with the program and sticking with Razorback football, he comes out as a tight end and has a huge game yesterday where he had 6 catches for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns. His first multi-touchdown game in his career as a Razorback. And also, he had more touchdown catches in this game than he did all last season combined. So really stood out there. And I can't tell you how awesome it is to see that with Trey Knox. I think we were all pretty hopeful from where he was at in his position, that maybe, just maybe, he would be able to be a guy that they could count on a tight end, because they haven't found any consistency at that position. Blake Kern last year, he's gone. Hudson Henry just is a non-factor, I guess. Like, he's just not even on the field most of the time. Nathan Bax has been there, but you don't really know much about him. Everybody was looking at Trey Knox and saying, okay, we could see this working, because we know he's got great hands. We know he's got a wide receiver mentality. We know he's athletic. Can he do all the other things as far as the tight end goes to transition into that position? Can he make it happen? And I think it's pretty safe to say that, yeah, he's pretty good at that. So he takes care of business and has a huge game for Arkansas. And I just think that having a weapon like that, a guy that size, a guy with that mentality of almost like a wide receiver and all of those things, that's going to be nothing but great for Arkansas, especially when they get an SEC play and going up against some really good defenses. Having a middle-of-the-field guy, or a guy that can run as well as any tight end in the country and have the athleticism to go with it, he's going to be one of the quarterback's best friends, especially when it comes to KJ Jefferson. Now, all the other wide receivers honestly played really well. Like that catch by Jaden Hazelwood for his touchdown, that was awesome. Like, that was a great throw, and it was a great catch there. That was great. Matt Landers, you saw a little bit of his ability there too, here and there. Didn't really get a whole lot of the other wide receivers as involved in this game, but still looked pretty good, looked for the part, and looked like Arkansas was really doing some good things in the passing game. Offense in general was great, I believe. I mean, Rocket Sanders goes out there and has his first 100-yard game, 20 carries, 122 yards, and or 117 yards, I should say, because he did lose some. He didn't get a touchdown, but he did have a 37-yard run. He's averaging almost 6 yards a carry. So that was awesome. And then KJ got 87 yards added to the mix and also a touchdown him for rushing. And KJ had 3 touchdown passes. So, again, the offense was great. So we could really dive into all that specifically. The offensive line, people were talking about, man, they weren't blocking. No one was blocking. I was like, man, we'll use this point a little bit later, but I think that was more of a credit to Cincinnati's defensive front. But I'm really encouraged. In fact, I would say I'm even more encouraged by the Razorback offense now than what I was before the game, because the way that they have different weapons and guys that you were hopeful that could get involved did get involved. I mean, the guys you were hopeful for, like Jaden Hazelwood, you were hopeful for him being a factor. He was. You were hopeful for Trey Knox, a tight end, being a factor. He absolutely was. Like, you were hopeful for this, and they really showed out and really looked good too. And at the running back position, even I think it's Rashad. Is it Dubinian or Dubinian, something like that? I don't know. I'll figure out how to pronounce his name, I'm sure, at some point. But even as a freshman, he looked good. So you get Dominic Johnson back at some point in time. That'll be huge for the running back room. KJ still doing KJ things, doing his thing, which is awesome. You can tell he looks a little bit faster from last year, maybe a lot faster than last year. So overall, just I love where the offense was, but I think it really showed out with Trey Knox. And again, because of his journey and how it's crazy it's been. And I started thinking about just the skill position guys in general. Like, you got big dudes across the board. Like, you have your starting 3 wide receivers are all 6'3" or above, and Matt Landers is 6'5". Your tight end now with Trey Knox is 6'5", like 240. KJ 6'3", 240. You got Rocket Sanders 6'2", 230. Dominic Johnson comes back, he's like 6'1", 230. I mean, you got some big old dudes back there. And I think that the more and more as the time and as the season progresses, the better the offense will end up being. And so that's kind of where my hope is lying to. And I think that Trey Knox will be a big part of it. And so I don't know. I look at trends. I like to look at history. I like to look at, okay, what did we see in year 1 under Sam Pittman? What did we see under year 2 under Sam Pittman? How did it transition? How did it go? How did it look? I think overall it was something that really showed improvement in the offense side of things, as long as everybody stays healthy as time went on. So that's my first takeaway, and we'll talk about some of the other takeaways I had here in just a second. But folks, if you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of the greatest joys. And guess what? There is a new flavor. It is cookie dough. I love cookie dough, and I love chocolate. And so when it's both things put together, it ends up being just absolutely incredible. It's a cookie dough chunk puff. It has 100% real chocolate covered in it, and you can enjoy eating cookie dough without the hassles of making it. So that's really the best thing. And the best thing about it is that it's actually healthy. That's a pretty big deal too. So if you haven't tried it, give it a shot. I promise you won't be disappointed. You can go to their website at built.com and you can use promo code LOCKEDON15 for 15% off your next order. It's as simple as that. Locked On 15 will get you 15% off. Doesn't matter how many you buy. Doesn't matter how many you eat. Doesn't matter if you buy out the whole store. That's fine. 15% off over at built.com.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so continuing on with our takeaways from the Razorback game against Cincinnati. I know Sam Pittman's actually going to be meeting with the media later today, so some of you are listening to this and may have some news break. Hopefully it's nothing too crazy or too sudden. But if anything breaks and you don't hear it on this podcast, it was because it was recorded before the press conference. So, but we'll talk about that. Anything that comes out of that press conference tomorrow. So just stay tight or hang tight, and we'll have that going on. But I mentioned something I really liked, or at least a positive. Now we got to get into the negative, because there were some things, as encouraged as I may be, I was also looking at some of the things where I'm like, okay, this needs to change. This needs to look better. This needs to, do this, do that, whatever it is. And I think you can do both. I'm going to preface this by saying I think you can still be encouraged. You can still feel good about the season. You can still feel you're a good football team while also realizing that there are some things that need to be improved on. Even Sam Pittman would probably say that. But the first thing, of course, is the cornerback position. Now, I was actually pretty high on the cornerbacks because I'm like, okay, well, you got some transfers in. You got some experienced guys coming back. Best case scenario, you're better than what you were last year. Worst case scenario, you're just as good. Like, I didn't think that the cornerbacks were going to take a step back. And in this game, and it should have made sense. Like, it should have made sense from when Sam Pittman was talking about it all fall camp, where he's like, no cornerback. It's been a battle there because nobody's been able to step up and stand out. And that was, I think, pretty obvious in the game against Cincinnati. Now, again, I'm not saying that it's just trash. Like some people like to overreact, saying, oh, our cornerbacks suck. Easy. Okay. Your defense held them to 17 points or 24 points. It's not like not like they're just absolute, terrible. But there were a lot of deficiencies, especially over the top in man coverage. Guys got beat a lot. Ladarius Bishop was a guy that I was really disappointed because he's a guy who's experienced. He played last year, and there were back-to-back plays. He just got ripped, and Cincinnati ended up scoring a big touchdown from that. So that was disappointing. I think that Dwight McLaughlin with a pick, that was big, but you can still see that he's figuring things out. He's getting to that point. My guy Hudson Clark played well. In fact, I would make the argument that between him and Dwight that they were the best cornerbacks on the field. And so I think that may be your starters going forward. But when the other guys came in after those guys, that's where it really got dicey. And so adding into that mix, and we'll find out today, hopefully more about it from Sam Pittman. We'll know the situation with Miles Slusher and Jalen Catalon. Both those guys went out of the game. Miles Slusher's looked bad, but Sam Pittman said that he thought he was going to be fine in the press conference. Jalen Catalon, we don't know. But I did see Jalen Catalon on the sidelines after the game. He didn't have any pads on, and he seemed in good spirits. And he also didn't have a cast or anything because I think people saw that it looked like it was a shoulder, but he didn't have a cast. He didn't have anything on that. So I was like, okay, well, maybe that means that they're just more being precautious. Like they're like, hey, he's banged up a little bit, dinged up a little bit. Let's just get him out of there, and let's make sure that we have him for the rest of the season. That's what I'm hopeful for. So we'll know the situations with them. But when Miles Slusher went out, and when Jalen Catalon went out, I mean, that was pretty brutal. And then, again, people are wondering what does that have to do with cornerbacks, especially if they're at the safety position. Like, people forget, like, safety position, like Jalen Catalon, when he was out on the field, the secondary was in good shape. Like, and they weren't perfect. So I'm not trying, because somebody will be like, well, what about this one play? Yes, plays like that are going to happen. You're not going to be locked down the entire game. But overall, the secondary was in good shape when Catalon was in there and Slusher was in there. And when they went out, you saw the deficiency there. You saw that there was a pretty significant step back. And, there was not really the safety help over top. I think that the man-to-man coverage was definitely lacking. And that's where Cincinnati really took advantage of it. So you got to give a lot of credit to them. I said Ladarius Bishop getting burned like that was a bad deal. But overall, it was frustrating. It was annoying, but it's fixable. I think so. Because everyone was like, oh, Spencer Rattler's just going to eat us alive. No, he's not. Stop. Like, the overreaction from people is just mind-blowing. And again, like, it doesn't have to be so black and white. Like, it doesn't have to be like you either say the cornerbacks are great or the cornerbacks are terrible. Like, can't you be somewhere in the middle where you're saying, hey, there are good plays here. They are going to be fine. There are reasons to believe that they're going to be a solid group of guys, while also saying that there are some things they need to work on. Like, you can do both. It's not just clear as crystal where it's like they either are amazing or they suck, even though people like to put the categories in sports that way. And it's just a little more complicated than that. And also, we had one game of it, because I will bet you dollars to donuts, especially after seeing South Carolina's offense in game one, that Spencer Rattler is not going to eat Arkansas alive. Like, I just don't believe that. I don't believe it. I think that the lack of pressure at times also didn't do the cornerbacks any favors, which there were times it got good. There were times it was there. But I think the lack of getting to the quarterback and trying to make him make a quick decision was also impactful in these games as well. So, it's an all-encompassing thing. But the cornerbacks are definitely was the biggest weakness I saw on Saturday. And so hopefully they figure that position out. Maybe they move some guys around. Maybe they just had a bad game. There could be that. That's what you could be hopeful for too. Like, there could be a lot of different things, a lot of different reasons as to why the team didn't look as good as what we had all hoped, or at least that unit. But I still think there's plenty of reason to believe that it'll be okay. I still think there's plenty of talent there. I still think that they'll get better as the season goes on. And I still think that hoping and praying when Miles Slusher comes back, as well as Jalen Catalon, and they're healthy, good to go, like that's going to be big. Like, you got to get Catalon back. Like, Slusher's a big deal too, like, because he's an experienced guy at that nickel position. You need him. But Catalon, that's the big dog. You got to get him back. He has to be healthy, because if he, and again, knock on wood, we'll find out hopefully more today. But if he's out for a significant period of time, oh man, you can still be all right, but I don't feel as confident. I don't feel as good about it. So hopefully Jalen, hopefully old cat man, you're able to come back and be healthy and all that stuff too. So cornerbacks need work. There's no doubt. And I think that Barry Odom will do a good job of getting those guys ready. I think Dominic Bowman is a really good cornerback coach. I think he'll continue to get those guys and develop and learn a lot from that game against Cincinnati. And they'll put some pieces together, put some things together, and they'll come out being a bigger and better team than what they were this past weekend as well. We'll get to our final takeaway from the Arkansas and Cincinnati game coming up after this on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, so final segment of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, and my final takeaway from this Arkansas and Cincinnati game, which some of you are going to laugh at me for and give me crap for, which is fine because of how my prediction went and everything. But here's my takeaway. Say what you want about the game, have your opinion about the game. Cincinnati is a lot better of a team than I thought they would be. I'll admit it. Cincinnati, some of you will be like, I tried to tell you. Fine, okay. But Cincinnati, even though they lost a lot of pieces from last year's college football playoff team, folks, that team probably will go 11-1 again. Like, they're going to win double-digit games. Luke Fickell's phenomenal. Like, that dude is a coach that belongs in the SEC. He's an SEC-minded coach. He's got great recruiting. He preaches and teaches physicality, and toughness. He needs to find a field goal kicker, because apparently that's been an ongoing issue. Had some penalties there overall, like a lot of them, actually. But that dude is a great coach. And that Cincinnati team, I was thinking about it after the end of the game, and I started looking at the rest of the schedule, which we'll know and we'll see how some of those things go too. And in fact, I'll have a few comments here in the end about overall the SEC from the weekend. But overall, I was just like impressed. I was really impressed by how good they were, how physical they were. That looked like an SEC team. And I was thinking that after that game, you could make an argument that Cincinnati will for sure be a top 3 team that Arkansas plays this year. Of all their 12 games, I think that was at least their 3rd toughest game of the season. Alabama's number 1. We all know that. Number 2, we'll see. Could be BYU. Could be A&M. Mississippi State look good. Like, we'll see. Maybe Cincinnati could be even 2, but they're no lower than 3. Like, that was going to, and so that's what gives me a little bit more hope too, where it's like, you got out of there with a win against a team that is going to have double-digit wins this year, win their conference, and is really well coached and a very physical team. So that gives me a little bit more solace. And so that was a takeaway that I had, because I was just like impressed. And I don't think that there was a lot of things that Arkansas did or didn't do that people were saying how bad it, like, oh, we can't block. Oh, we can't do this. Oh, we can't do that. I'm like, you got to look at it in the lens of it is still a football game with another team on the other side. It's not always about you. Sometimes on the other side of the ball, the other team is pretty good too. Sometimes on the other side of the ball, they got some pretty good players as well. It happens. You know what? If your line lets the guy come through, is that your line not blocking, or is that a great play by the defensive player? Like, if your cornerback gets beat deep, does that mean that your cornerback sucks? Or does that mean they just got a phenomenal wide receiver out there that's got a lot of speed? Sometimes you got to look at it through that lens too. And that's where I'm giving a lot of credit to Cincinnati. Arkansas won this game by 7 points, not because they were a bad team and Arkansas played poorly. Arkansas did not play bad. And anybody that says Arkansas played bad, you need to watch more football. Did they play the best? No. But they didn't play bad. Cincinnati's a really good team, and you got to give a lot of credit to them. And I think that once the end of the season comes through and Arkansas has a great year, which we're all anticipating and hoping for, we're going to look back on that Cincinnati game and be like, man, that's a huge win. That Cincinnati team went 11-1. Their only loss was to us. I would be shocked if we didn't look back on that game and look at it in a different light once the end of the season happens. So they're better. They're a great team, and a lot of respect to them and a lot of respect to Luke Fickell. So those of you who are just thinking that, oh my gosh, we suck, we should be pounding this team. Well, I thought we would pound them too, but they shocked me. They surprised me. They're a lot better than what I thought. So I'll admit it. But I'm hoping that that's going to be an easier game upcoming this weekend against South Carolina, which I know we'll preview throughout this week too. I'm hoping that, of course, in the Missouri State after that, and then a huge game against A&M. So got to keep it moving, but I would be hard-pressed to think that Arkansas struggles more with South Carolina than they did BYU. Just don't see that happening, at least not at this point in time. But we'll talk about predictions and everything later. Also, real quick, I know we're going to be ending the podcast soon, but I wanted to bring up some of the things that came from the SEC real quick. Shout out to the SEC and the dominance that they showed over the weekend, 13-1 in all their games. And so Arkansas got a lot of credit for it. Alabama and Georgia look stupid, just stupid. Like Alabama played Utah State, so whatever, but Georgia just put the hammer down on it out in Oregon. So they look scary once again. It'll probably be those two teams again, and probably those teams in the college football playoff again. But, man, they look good. Honestly, the only teams that really look good from the SEC, like good, I would say is Bama and Georgia. I still think Arkansas looked good because it was a good win. Say what you want. I still think they look good. Mississippi State looked really good, too, in their game against Memphis. But besides that, nobody really stood out. Oh, in Florida, duh. That was a huge game. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but I actually called that game. I had a feeling that Florida was going to win that because I love Billy. I think Billy Napier is a phenomenal coach. I still think that LSU should have hired him. Talk about that in a second. But I think he's going to go down to Florida, would take that talent that Dan Mullen left and really blow it up and really do a really good job. So I'm really impressed by them, and I think they're going to be scary. And they may be a team, especially with Anthony Richardson, that may be competing for the East. That East may be a lot more enticing because you got Georgia, who's great, but then you got Florida, who looks a lot better. You got Tennessee, who can score a ton of points. Kentucky, people still keep sleeping on them. So it could be a pretty interesting thing in the East this year because you have some good quality teams. But Florida, I think 5 teams look good in the SEC this year, or in this first week. 5 teams: Bama, Georgia, Arkansas, Florida, Mississippi State. Those are the 5 teams that look good. Then there were teams that were just kind of like whatever, like A&M beating Stephen F. Austin or whoever they played 31-0 with lightning delays. Nah, they didn't look great. Ole Miss didn't look awesome. They beat Troy. Okay. It's like Missouri. What could you take away from them? Really, Tennessee. They smoked those teams. Kentucky was fine. Like Vandy, you beat Elon, sweet. Like some of them was just kind of like whatever. Now the teams that look bad though, that thing that happened last night in that LSU Florida State game, that they should, those coaches, those players, everybody involved in that football game needs to sit down, get on their knees, and pray to the football gods, begging for forgiveness for going out there and showing that type of display of football, quote unquote, because that was one of the most disgusting games I've ever seen in my life. The most poorly coached game, poorly executed game. Both teams looked like they just did not want to win. It should have ended in a tie. That's what it should have done. They should have just said no overtime, no nothing, just ended in a tie. But Florida State and Mike Norvell, I don't think Mike Norvell's a great coach. I think he's going to get fired after this year. I don't think he's a great coach. I think that they're just so undisciplined, and the fact that LSU missed that extra point to tie it with no time on the clock, to go to overtime, and they got it blocked, pathetic. They got a field goal blocked. They got an extra point blocked. They had 2 muffed punts. Special teams was disgusting for LSU. That's what lost them the game, essentially. But also Florida State was trying to give it to them with the fumble on the goal line where they could have just punched it in for a touchdown to seal the game. Didn't do it. Whatever you want to call it. It was just a disgusting display. Now you got problems with LSU players, it seems like. Some people are really upset. You got some guys like, was it Bouts or Boots, however you say his name, the great wide receiver, deleted all of his LSU stuff off Instagram. So Looks really dicey here in the beginning for LSU, which I'm sure none of you Razorback fans have any issues with whatsoever, and you're probably not crying over spilled milk in that one. But that's just I don't know. I think that Brian Kelly is going to be in for a rude awakening this year. I just don't see them being very like they that was the most. I understand it's first year and all of that, and I get it. It's against a big opponent, Florida State. I get all that, but that was the most poorly coached season opener from what's supposed to be a great coach, great team that I've ever seen. Like, I can make excuses. Like, I don't think Sam Pittman coached the most cleanest game in his first game, but it's almost like, okay, first year coach, sometimes those things happen. And then sometimes you could even make the argument for, new coaches being there as well. Like, just the transitional of like trying to get things into the swing of things and trying to get everybody to understand. Like, I can see that from that angle. But Brian Kelly and OSU and that mix and what I saw on last night against Florida State, I don't know what that was. That was worse than I could have ever imagined. Brian Kelly's been doing this a long time, and his team looked like they had never played, like never practiced. It looked embarrassing. It looked awful. And again, I ain't crying about it. I know you aren't crying about it, Razorback fans, but who knows? Maybe that could be another nice little game that Arkansas can take care of business at home. We'll see. But overall, just great to have college football back. Great to have week 1 done. And we'll see how it goes from there. Appreciate everybody listening in to the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on Google Play. You can also get after me on Twitter at BuzzJohnNabors for any questions, comments, concerns that you may have. We'll keep it going from there. Same podcast time, same podcast channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you then.